In this CEO interview series, Secrets to Scaling, I'm going to be sitting down with some of the most impressive senior leaders in the technology sector to hear about the lessons they've learned on the path to scaling businesses. And today, I'm really excited to be joined by Faisal Galaria, an experienced technology executive who's worked in some of the world's most disruptive consumer tech companies. Faisal, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So you've worked at the bleeding edge of technology throughout your career for over 25 years. Perhaps you can just start by telling us how you found your way into the tech sector.
That's interesting because I never actually aspired to be in the technology space. I sort of found myself here almost by accident. Growing up, like most children, I was interested in technology, but actually was a better athlete than I was a geek. And so what I found myself doing was being good over 400 meters, and I was a schoolboy athlete, and then a city athlete, and then a North of England athlete, and I ended up being a UK under 20 400 meter runner. And so when it came to leaving school, I actually applied to join the Royal Marines and was accepted to Sandhurst. And when I told my family that I wasn't going to university and I was going to join the British Army, we had a family intervention, and I was told that that's not going to happen, and I would go to university. Luckily, I was accepted into UMIS, the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, where I was surrounded by engineers and technologists for the first time. And whilst I was studying law and economics, started to build a rapport and start to understand, the symbiosis between the commercial world and the world of technology, computer science, and engineers. I graduated from UMIST and was lucky to be offered a place with Arthur Anderson in the consulting division, and at first worked in the energy and utilities practice, and was dispatched to India and Croatia and Switzerland before coming back to the UK and starting some projects in the TMT space. After that, I went to ESA in Barcelona to do my MBA and graduated into the tail end of the tech recession in 2003. But was luckily in touch with Ed Richards, who was a former advisor to the Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair. He was a client of mine during his time at the BBC, and he had written the Communications Act of 2003, which created the Converged Technology, Telecoms and Media Regulator, Ofcom. And he offered me a position to work with him. He'd written himself in as the COO of Ofcom. To work with him as a strategy manager. And it was there that I got to work on a number of engagements, for example, investigating whether Sky had monopoly rights of Premiership League football, investigating the BT and whether there should be open access to fibre and to create competition in the UK, and my passion, which was exploring P2P and voice over IP. So it was there that I got to meet a number of the voice over IP companies, or the emerging voice over IP companies, including Vonage, Net2Phone, Yahoo Messenger, and after meeting the three founders of Skype, Yanis, Nicholas, and Jeffrey Prentice, I was offered a job to help start Skype.
So that brings us on to the journey with Skype, where I think you joined as employee number 13 and then sold the business to eBay for $3.1 billion in the space of 3 years. Quite an impressive journey. So tell us how you managed to achieve that.
When I think back over that early period with Skype, it's I'm not sure it's true to say that the telcos didn't see us coming. Partly because one of the first things I was responsible for doing was to actually going back to those telcos as the ex-regulator and working out their interconnect deals so that Skype calls could terminate on landlines and mobile phone operators. So we were very much working with them. I then went on to do distribution deals, working with the with the mobile operators, with the fixed phone operators, where they would represent us, or their partners would represent us. We'd build a co-branded client. They would take payment for us, and so we were working very much with the telcos. And at one point, we even started talking to the telcos about them investing in Skype and becoming a partner, both an equity partner and a distribution partner. So it's not a case that they didn't see us coming. I think it's more of a case of they just weren't able to respond in the same way and didn't quite understand what we were trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
So we were definitely working with them. They saw us coming. I just don't think they understood the pace and the purpose with which we were building Skype.
Yeah. Okay. And presumably a lot of that comes from when you're sitting in a BT in a big corporate, when you've got the security of working in that kind of business, versus in a Skype when you're employee number 13, and that sort of, you need to succeed, you have to succeed, you have to disrupt. I guess that's the difference. So maybe BT saw Skype coming but couldn't enable that themselves, or couldn't leverage that kind of opportunity themselves.
You mentioned BT, which of course
just
used to be around the corner, and I remember being sat there 20 years ago now and talking to them about partnering with early Skype. I think it's at Skype we were very lucky to hire some of the most brilliant people that I've worked with, people that had real passion. There was no industry precedent for us to hire from. We weren't hiring the best people that had done voice over IP before, because it hadn't been done before. So we were forced to hire just the best people we could find, people that were capable, people that were smart, people that had energy, had passion, that were driven, and had succeeded at something before. You couldn't have succeeded at voice over IP before, because we were creating that. And I think that drive to disrupt, to do whatever it takes, describes as a startup or a growth company in a way that a large corporate finds difficult to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the reason that we succeeded is we had this innate drive, this sense of purpose, and a belief that we could do grand, amazing things, and then put our minds to making it happen.
Yep. So I think that's where you say you sort of look for excellence in hiring people, and it didn't need to necessarily come from someone that had achieved success in their career so far. So it could have been an athlete. You mentioned even a chess champion. I know you were a sprinter, and the 400 meters, I think. So after a stint at Kayak, you then found your way onto another rocket ship, one called Spotify, where you led their international expansion into the US, amongst other regions. For me, Spotify is just a great product. It's quick, it's easy to use, but we then forget how kind of complex the ecosystem is that sits behind that. So you know that better than most. Perhaps you can give us a behind-the-scenes glimpse into launching Spotify outside of Europe and particularly into the US.
So I was reintroduced to Daniel Ek, one of the co-founders of Spotify, by a friend, Shakil Khan. Daniel and I had worked together when he was a consultant to Skype, and we were building out Skype in China. But we were reintroduced, and when I met Daniel, he had launched Spotify in Sweden and the UK. But over dinner, he told me about his vision about building the world's biggest music streaming platform that would reach every corner of the planet and allow anyone on almost any smart device, be that a mobile phone or a laptop, to access any music that was ever created instantaneously, in a way that you couldn't do at the time with an MP3. You had to go and download a track, and then it would take a little bit of time and then play it. Imagine you could listen to anything you wanted, from what your grandparents used to listen to whatever was current in the charts, instantaneously, anywhere. And I thought that sounds like magic. If you can listen to anything, anywhere, that's magic. And he had me hooked. But what Daniel was looking for was he wanted to continue to focus on building the technology, and wanted to bring in the people around him that could focus on building the commercial and the geographic expansion. Because if you want to be everywhere, you've got to figure out how to hire people in the key markets that you want to operate in. You need to find those people, build the offices, figure out how you're going to do ad sales, work with the music labels, work with the composing societies to represent the authors of the music. You have to work with the artists to make sure you've got all of the local artists on. You've got to get the artists to be excited about the Spotify. And so we worked with a lot of artists to get them to talk about Spotify and tell their fans why they were excited about Spotify. And then you launch, and then we go on to the next market. So I think I launched 7 markets in total, everything from Belgium, France, Finland, Spain, to the United States, which was I guess, as you mentioned, it was the most important music market in the world. It's where the labels were based. It's where some of the biggest music artists were based, but it's also the biggest market in the world for music. And the music labels were under considerable pressure at the time from Apple not to license Spotify streaming music rights. And so whilst we set up an office and we acquired, for example, 50% of LimeWire, another streaming service, it took us 2 years to be able to license the music for the United States, and it took meeting after meeting. It was one of the most exciting, but actually one of the toughest commercial negotiations. And during that time, I was traveling from London to New York, where the majority of labels were based, and then from New York onto San Francisco, and meeting with the team at Facebook as was figuring out how the partnership between Facebook and Spotify would work, and then going on to either Hong Kong or Singapore, where we were trying to launch offices there and start streaming music in Asia before coming back to London. So I was traveling around the world at that point. This is not good for my carbon footprint, but I was probably traveling around the world 10 times a year at that point.
Yeah, we hear stories like Daniel Ek sleeping outside the office, or can't remember if it was the home or the office of record label producers. Clearly a very, very fun time for you and the team there, but the success is obvious, and Spotify is now so much in our daily lives that great that you managed to play a part in that.
Thinking back now, I remember walking into an office with Sean Parker, the founder of Napster, and Daniel into the CEO of Universal Music's office, and Sean had told us that he knew him, and we were going to get the music rights because Sean was with us, and Daniel was going to explain the future with Spotify, and we walked into this office, which was a beautiful, very, very long office with a desk at the end. This elderly CEO gets up from behind his desk, and I think this is going to be interesting. We're going to do this deal, and we're going to launch the United States. And as we walk from the doors towards this desk at the end of the office, he starts shouting, "I bet you came on a private jet, didn't you? I used to have a private jet. It was because of you that I don't have a private jet anymore." And you could see Sean was becoming uncomfortable, and I think he vomited in his mouth. So now you've got Daniel on one side, Sean with a mouthful, and we're going to try and have this conversation. And the only thing I could do was figure out where the nearest bin was. So but it was getting those label deals in the US were critical to it was the cannot lose market. We couldn't have had Spotify being the commercial success it is today without launching in the United States, and so it was really important for us to do that and really set the tone for the company, which eventually listed in the United States as well.
So you then spent 4 years at Alvarez & Marsal, one of the world's leading turnaround and sort of consulting firms. So you got pulled back into consulting, having started your career there. A lot of people, once they've gone into consulting, only stay there. And I know you were sort of a quasi-operator at Alvarez & Marsal, often being dropped in as an interim into some of their clients. So just intrigued to see the how you compare them in terms of being a real operator and a quasi-operator, and what then pulled you back into sort of the real life operator world with Go Compare.
I think Alvarez & Marsal, when I came across it, was a very different consultancy, as you described. It's not the type of place that was focused on reports and PowerPoint presentations. It was very much a hands-on, sleeves rolled up type environment that parachuted senior executives parachuted partners into senior executive interim positions. I was actually introduced to A&M by someone called Joe Berardino, who I'd worked with many years ago at Arthur Andersen as a very junior consultant. He was actually at the time the CEO of Andersen Worldwide, and when Arthur Andersen went through its bankruptcy proceedings, Alvarez & Marsal were brought in as the final restructuring consultants. And so at some point I reconnected with Joe, and he told me that a number of the partners, the senior most partners at Arthur Andersen, had joined Alvarez & Marsal, and that it was a different type of environment. It had many of the characteristics of Arthur Andersen, but was really an inverted pyramid rather than having lots and lots of consultants and managers, it was actually the partners that were out, rather than focused on selling work, actually delivering engagements and doing these interim assignments. And I found myself working on some, for me, what were fascinating opportunities, but at the other end of the spectrum from growth. So where companies were in a transition or requiring transformation. So companies like HMV, where I joined post bankruptcy when Deloitte were appointed as administrators. Companies like OLX, where I helped, which is classifieds business owned by Naspers, where I helped grow the business internationally. Companies like Avast, which is a mobile security company, and companies like Travelocity, which I was dropped into as the chief marketing officer or the chief transformation officer, and helped sell the company to Expedia for $280 million. Fundamentally, if you are an operator, even a quasi-operator, one of the things that you look for is some kind of demonstrable success. And there are a few things that you can do in the life of a company that are milestone successes, and one of them is an IPO. And so when I was offered the opportunity to carve out Go Compare from the UK listed insurance company eSure, and prepare that and then eventually list that on the London Stock Exchange, that was an opportunity, even though it wasn't quite the global technology company that I'd worked for before. The opportunity to lead a London Stock Exchange listing was a quixotic opportunity, and one that I personally couldn't say no to.
Yeah, and obviously another very successful transaction, and something we've seen a little bit less of in recent history in terms of IPOs, but they seem to be making a bit of a comeback.
I hope so.
The sort of world does need them. There eventually comes a point you sort of can't stay in private hands for too much longer.
Although we do seem to have ever increasingly larger funds that seem to be putting off the day when companies need to IPO. We've just seen Wiz turn down a $23 billion opportunity today. So there's definitely room for some very large private equity-backed companies.
Yeah, the world's certainly changed and keeps changing. And on that subject, sort of brings us on to the last 5 years of your career, which have been spent in, we talk about bleeding edge technology, it's as bleeding edge as they come in terms of augmented reality. So you've actually seen it from two very different vantage points from an AR perspective. So first at Blipper, which was a software play by the end and former unicorn. Everyone knows the sort of story there, and you led the turnaround, getting the business back to profitability. And then more recently, Magic Leap, a US hardware company backed by, I think it's about $3.5 billion from the sort of Saudi PIF. I think, and we were talking about this off camera, I think AR still is a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. Maybe not to someone like yourself, where you've spent so long and been so fundamental in its development, but just talk us through how you've seen AR evolve in the time you've been involved in it. And I suppose the question is, when do you think it will have this explosion onto the public consciousness? I don't think we've seen it just yet.
That's a good question, and I wish I had a definitive answer to give you, Andy. Look, I think it's really hard to generalize across the landscape of AR, XR, VR, MR technologies. Certainly there's been a number of winners and losers over the years. I personally remain really bullish on the technology, and I'm actively investing personally in the space, particularly in an area that I find fascinating, which is the convergence between AR and medicine and health tech.
Yeah.
But it's probably true to say that whether it's AR or VR or XR has probably taken longer than any of us expected. If you think about Blipper, which was formed in 2011, went bust in 2018 when it was losing 34 million pounds a year. That's already a 7-year period, and that's already six years ago. During that period, there were already signs that AR might be on the threshold of being something bigger than even that we see today. There was, there was already AR Kit and AR Core, which is the core tech stack on every mobile phone, every smartphone, whether it's an Android or an iOS. There's 5 billion installations of that. So you could start to think about, well, if the tech stack is there, and there was starting to be 5G was being rolled out, and if you think about the purpose of 5G with 100 times the bandwidth of 4G, I think, well, it's not for streaming more Netflix or doing more TikTok. It has to be for immersive 3D content, and you could start to see a number of companies emerge that perhaps pointed at what might be companies like Pokemon Go. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
Pokemon Go, which in 2016 had 232 million users.
Mm-hmm.
Generated.
At that point, I think it was the fastest sign up in history.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Fastest downloaded app in history. In 2016, generated over $1 billion of revenue,
mm-hmm.
And was the hottest thing in 2016. What's interesting about that is, even now, 8 years later, it'd be tempting to suggest that it's gone and it's been forgotten about. But even last year, it generated over $750 million in revenue. So I think it points to there are use cases emerging, but when you look at the software space, the ecosystem hasn't developed as quickly as certainly I thought it would do.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look at the hardware space, particularly at the VR or MR, the mixed reality space, when I look at those, they seem to be focused largely on the gaming or on the entertainment space. And if you're going to win in that space, it strikes me that the price point, thousands of dollars, the form factor and the utility haven't yet found a fit.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the enterprise space where Magically plays, I think that's again very different from the VR and MR space. It's super early in enterprise enterprise AI. I don't think that we're going to see the problems that industries will need to be pointed at being articulated with systems integrators building content, understanding the size of those problems, building business models around them, building the MVPs, testing those MVPs, learning, resetting and coming back, and for that all to be repeated a few times. I think it's going to take another 5 or 6 years before the enterprise AR space really emerges. Mm-hmm. But having said that, as I said, at the top of the conversation, I remain really bullish about the space. If I fast forward 5 or 10 years, I can't imagine a world when we continue to engage with the internet like this, heads down on a 4-inch device. I much rather believe that when we interact with the internet at that point, which will be converged with AI, it will be heads up and a much more natural interaction rather than this.
Yeah. I think some people see virtual reality and augmented reality as sort of mutually exclusive, but the reality is that they feed into each other. I think the more people get comfortable with gaming using VR headsets, the more they'll understand what AR can actually do. And like you say, I think some of the really exciting use cases are in medicine and in healthcare. If you can think about, you've talked about it before, a diabetic being able to inject themselves using AR technology, or a surgeon performing surgery using AR. There's some very exciting use cases, but we're not quite there yet. And actually, to your point, AI, as it develops, integrates very well with AR, because AR is a way of, viewing what we're doing with AI that's not just, purely on a phone and in text form.
I think AI is actually a physical, a way of physically manifesting AR. And what I mean by that is, for a robot, for example, to be able to operate, it needs to understand the world around it, be able to move around, mm-hmm. which requires computer vision, which is synonymous with augmented reality. It needs to be able to do something called simultaneous localization and mapping, which is understanding the world and understanding where the device is relative to that world. And so I think whilst the hype today seems to be around AI, and specifically generative AI, actually when we start to get to useful manifestations of AI, they'll be using many of the technologies developed with whether it be computer vision, SLAM technology, or AR, to make those applications useful in the real world.
Yeah. And on the subject of AI, as we sort of build further into applying AI in our general lives, are there any industries you see as particularly ripe for disruption that's going to impact, or anything that you've got your eye on where you can see your next big disruption coming from?
I think whether it's AI or AR, we're about to see profound changes in the way that these technologies impact every industry. And so, while some of those use cases might be more obvious than others, and I mentioned medicine already, and one of the things I'm super excited about is the ability for doctors, surgeons, to be able to see in real time 3D scans, which enable them to both plan operations and perform those operations with a precision that hasn't been possible before. So I personally am super excited by that. But you can see use cases across engineering, learning and development. The Department of Defense in the United States is probably the biggest procurer of AR technologies. So there are a number of use cases, and I think already we're sort of getting used to heads-up or AR displays in cars and jet engines. I think when AR is around us all the time, the use cases will become more obvious, and we'll be interacting with AR and AR much more. And when it's around us like that, then it's sort of difficult to predict at this stage. But yeah, it feels to me as if we're on the brink of a paradigm shift in the way that we interact with the internet.
Yeah, I agree, and I think healthcare is also probably the industry I'm most excited about to see how new technology impacts that. It's also probably the most difficult area to actually realize those benefits, and there's an ecosystem, particularly in the UK, that is not easy to deliver innovation to, but I think we'll find a way at some point.
I think that the scale of the impact is going to be such that we need to find a way.
Yeah.
And whether it's the NHS or the FDA in the United States, I think the scale of the impact, when you look at the outcomes, when neurosurgeons are able to perform their operations faster, better, cheaper, with better outcomes, the case for the adoption of this technology becomes hard to ignore.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier some of the leaders that you've worked with. So Daniel Ek, as an example, the founder of Spotify. You've also worked with Steve Hafner, who founded Kayak. And then more recently, I suppose you've worked with Peggy Johnson, as an example, who I suppose you could describe as more of a corporate tech executive with more of a big company background. She was once voted one of the most powerful female engineers worldwide, and actually prior to Magic Leap worked directly for Satya Nadella at Microsoft. So I'm just very intrigued to see what you've learned from these different leaders on those scaling journeys and how you'd sort of compare their styles.
I count myself very lucky to have worked with some of the most remarkable CEOs of perhaps the last 25 years, and I'd add Nicholas Zenstrom to that list also at Skype. And I think looking back, what all of those CEO founders had was a relentless drive for growth, a passion for the consumer and solving the consumer problem, whatever that was. And then the other thing was a messianic belief, both in themselves and what they were doing. And that, in order to go up and change the world of music or travel or telecommunications, that belief that you could change the world, and you were going to build a company and a team around you of people that were going to, if not change the world, at least change that particular industry, takes a very particular kind of sense of purpose and sense of belief. The flip side of that is founders like that, I find, want to be in across everything, in all the details, make all of the decisions. So when I met Peggy Johnson at Magic Leap, who'd previously run all of BD and Corp Dev at Microsoft and had been brought in to run Magic Leap, she was a completely different type of CEO. Whereas Nicholas or Daniel or Steve had literally willed their company into existence. And that manifested in the way that they managed and worked. Peggy was managing through teams and influence and delegation, and really leveraging the experience of her team and the knowledge of the people underneath her executives to make things happen in a much more distributed, scalable way. And it was, for me, having really grown up working with and for CEO founders to see this other way of managing was quite different. Really added a new repertoire, if you like, but very different and very appropriate to a different scale of company. I think it's probably true to say that in a growth company, in a very fast growing company, you need that messianic vision and you need that command and control to be able to have the singular purpose and drive in a few years to being a company, as transformational as, for example, Skype that we sold in 3 years. But in a much bigger company that's much more complex with many clients, the role of the CEO that I think was Peggy demonstrated could be quite different. She was managing the stakeholders, managing a senior executive team, and the senior executive team were operating through their teams and getting stuff done at scale through their teams, and a very different way of managing a much larger company.
Yeah. And a lot of founders go on that journey, don't they, of wanting to be the CEO of the big company once they've achieved that success. And I think many of them struggle, many of them fail, some succeed. Someone like Daniel Ek succeeded on that journey. So it must take it takes a special character to found and build a company, but to stay on as CEO, it takes something quite extraordinary, I would say.
I think you're probably right. I think what it takes to be a founder and be successful as a founder is probably quite different to what it takes to be successful as a large corporate executive. They're two different sets of skills and muscles. And when you look at somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or Daniel Ek that have succeeded in going all the way through, I think they are remarkable because they're the exceptions rather than the rule. I think for every Daniel Ek, there must be 10,000 CEOs that would have liked to have gone all the way through, but it's different.
Yeah, very different. So just to sort of bring things together, if we look at your career, the success you've had time and time again, what would you say has been the common theme in enabling these scaling journeys, and what's brought that together in terms of getting wins and success over and over again?
I think looking back, I try to look for the repeatable patterns, and in companies like Skype, Kayak, Spotify, Magic Leap, I think there are repeatable patterns around the right technology, the right team, with the right ecosystem being developed around them. So I think being able to spot those waves, repeatable patterns, whether you're an investor or whether you're an operator, are crucial to being if you want to be at the cutting edge of technology. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I think you'll like this as a recruiter. I ultimately think it comes down to people and hiring the right people. Because if I think back, and Skype was the first one, there's no reason why BT, with all of the R&D, connection into every house, the funding that it had, the fact that it was using voice over IP in its core network, sat in a room with us and still let Skype happen underneath their noses. It wasn't like we were hiding what we were doing. We were right there in front of them. But it was the people that Skype hired, or Spotify or Kayak, who were really disruptors. And by that, what I mean is nobody came from the industry. Everybody was outside from outside, but they were all sort of athletes, people who'd been super successful, who were driven. I think it was Steve Jobs that described the idea of wanting to work with pirates, and I think that's foundational to any disruptive company. By pirates, I mean it's people that have the audacity and the courage to take big risks, both on the company and on themselves, in return for outsized rewards. And it's that collective vision and dream, and that desire to be a pirate on the outside and solve something big and worthwhile, and for some outside reward, that I think makes all of those companies successful and different from the incumbents.
Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in how you maintain that through the different stages. I know you've never lost your sprinter's instinct. I know that from you turning up with a folding bike every time we've met up. So that's clearly stayed with you. But being a pirate feels relevant at the early stage when you're, at the start of a journey. When you become a big corporate, how do you maintain that win or die mentality? Because a lot of companies fail at that.
I think that's the $64 million question, Andy. I personally have found that when a company gets to the stage where, rather than every day, adding incremental value and changing the company, it becomes more about the small tweaking that I kind of lose enthusiasm and energy. So for me, beyond 3 or 4 years where the company has had this exciting growth trajectory and it becomes a little bit more business as usual, I think it's very difficult, if I'm honest, to retain that sense of piracy. And it's the underdog against the giant Goliath. I think it's very, very difficult. If you can find me one, I'll definitely go and explore the opportunity, but I think it's super difficult.
It's probably a good question to finish on, the $64 million question. So it's been an excellent conversation, Faisal. Really grateful for your time. We could have gone for much longer, but in today's day and age, we better leave the audience wanting more. So Faisal, thanks very much for joining us. It's been an excellent conversation. I'm personally excited to see what you go and disrupt next, given your track record. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.